right now. A Theory of Sin. This is our new series. Currently I have 7 weeks planned for this series. And that's pretty good because last week I said 5 and I didn't double it. I just did 2 more once I wrote the outline. So you guys should be proud of me. I'm getting better. But we've got 7 weeks to talk about this. It almost was 8 because I was typing up this message and I thought, you know what, this could really be a 2-parter. But then I went, no, keep it in 1. But this is what we're starting now today. And I hope everybody's excited for it. What we'll be talking about with this series is, first of all, what sin is, what is sin, and then why it's important to think about as well. And kind of our main avenue or lens that we'll be looking at this whole series from is this idea of what makes something sinful. Why is sin sin? What makes it that way? How did God decide if something was sinful? What's the criteria for something to be godly or ungodly? And that's going to be the framework from which we do this whole series. So I hope have you ever thought about that? Why is something good or bad, right? Why is something sinful or not sinful? Is it just God picked some things, or is there rhyme or reason to it, or why not? I know I've had a lot of non-Christian friends have beef with me about things that they thought were Christian teaching, which they're not Christian teaching, and that's the point most of the time, but they go, I don't get why Christians think such and such is bad. Why are they such sticklers about this stuff? And I think that they have a good point. We should be able to answer those questions. And I think we'll be able to after this series. We're diving into this. We're looking at this big question of what makes something sinful because life is complex. Let's say that together. Life is complex. It's complex, right? We all have, if you looked at it from very far away, we've got similar lives. But the further that you dive into someone's life and how they live, we see that we're all very, very, very different, right? And the homes and the situations that we have are all very, very, very different. So it's hard to navigate with some of the trickier stuff. It's hard to navigate that question of what should I do? What is godly and what's not godly? We have all these situations where every action we take, every thought we think, every word we say has an opportunity to be ungodly or godly, and then all of our lives are very different and our circumstances are very different, so that doubly complicates that process. And so we're doing this series so that we all, as Christians, can be equipped to live in conviction in our lives. And what does that mean? Hopefully by the end of this series, we'll be better equipped to independently decipher whether actions are good or bad. Do I have it on there? Yes. Because of life's complexity, we need to be able to ask ourselves on the fly, is this godly? Right? That's the whole reason for this series. We should be able to live in conviction, right, in our own lives and be able to ask ourselves, hey, is what I'm doing good or bad? That's independent faith, right? Every situation that we're in, every action that we take or might not take, we shouldn't have to go ask a pastor, right? Or even go look it up on Google, right? We should think about, well, what do I know about God? What does God say? What makes something godly or not godly? And hopefully we can be better equipped to answer all of those questions by the end of this series so that we can have independency in our faith in each of our lives. Right? Life is far too complicated to be summed up in a list of do's and don'ts. Every single situation is different, even if there was a list of right and wrongs that was comprised of like 300 things. You know, there's a lot of churches that operate on the 10 Commandments, right? Which I think is bonkers for various reasons. But that's 10 things. And, we think, okay, here's the 10 things that I either have to do or not do. And if I do those things, then I'm godly. That is way off, right? Following God is an intricate, deep, all-encompassing form of life. And if we're committed to it, then every thought, every action, everything we do has the opportunity to be godly or ungodly. So we should be able to ask ourselves, for every action, every thought, every word, does this honor God or not? If there's not a list of things like, oh, hey, this is good and this is bad, we need to be able to ask ourselves on the fly for ourselves. We should be able to ask ourselves, is this godly, right? And to do that, we need to get down into the nitty-gritty of what makes something sinful. So that is kind of why we're doing this whole series. So what we're going to be doing today is the framework. We're going to get right into that. What does the Bible say about what's sinful and what's not, and what makes something sinful and what's not? A lot of this series is comprised of biblical logic. There's a lot of things in the Bible, questions that we have that aren't directly answered. But if you take truths from the Bible, and then, this is a crazy idea, I know. It's crazy. Are you guys ready for this? It's crazy. But if you take truths from the Bible, and then there's a wild trick that you can do. Think about them. That was a joke. Think about them. If you take truths from the Bible, and then you just think about them, use logic and reason, we can come up with good faith and conviction about what God wants for each of our lives with every action, right? But you have to use hard logic. You have to really think about it. You can't just make assumptions. You've got to question the way you teach. So this is the way you teach, the way you learn, the way you think, right? Question it 2, 3, 4 times. Make sure that you are following the truth down God's path. So that's what we're going to be doing with this series. We're going to be digging into the logic of sin. First slide. What is sin? So we're going to get into it right away. Right? We're going to talk about what sin is today, and then what makes something sinful, and have a couple of side notes, and that's going to be our message for today. Are you guys pumped? Is anybody pumped? If you're pumped, say, let's do it. Let's do it. If you're pumped, say, get her done. Get her done. You can do it. There we go. Any reference to a Sandler film, I'll eat it right up. Okay, here we go. What is sin? Sin is what humans ought not do. If you ought to do something, that means that you almost have like a universal obligation to do it. That's what you were made to do. You ought to do something. And sin is what we ought not do. Right? That is, and it's not just what Christians ought not do. If we believe that God is real, if we believe that God is the creator, sin isn't just for Christians, right? It's for everyone. Sin is the stuff that humans shouldn't do. What we ought not do. Sin is a divergence from God's, the Creator's, natural and universal and perfect laws. So what do I mean by that? Let me break this down. God, so let's assume, and of course we all will because we're Christians and we're following God. But let's assume that God's real, right? And from a secular point of view, that God's real. And He's this creator of the universe, right? And He's created all of the physical laws, all the scientific laws, all of everything about how the world and the universe and creation should exist, right? And the Bible teaches that that's true. The Bible also teaches that God has made moral law, right? That there are things innately that is right and wrong. There is right and wrong in the universe. And the right is God's perfect law. Think of it like physics. This is how things should work in a perfect world, right? There are these laws that we ought to abide by. Here's the kicker, though. God gave us all the ability to diverge from that law, right? God gave us all the ability to choose to not to abide by these perfect laws, right? This law that God made, the way that it should work, if we all worked in that law, right, we'd be in paradise. If the world worked the way it should, if nobody diverged from this law, we'd be back in the Garden of Eden, right? If there was no sin, which is what diverging from this law is, there'd be no tears, there'd be no pain, there'd be no death. That's what the Bible teaches, full stop, right? We only went out of paradise when we, what? Diverged from God's way, right? That is the place that we're in. So if the world abided by these laws, it'd work perfectly, it'd operate perfectly, we'd be in paradise. Here's some verses to back that up. Or here we go. God made a way for the world to operate perfectly. This happens when we all play by the rules. Here's Psalm 16:11. I've just got it in my notes. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. Your right hand, there are pleasures forever. So these ones in my notes, don't bother looking them up because they're just citations. So I'm going to go blow through them kind of quickly. The second one is this. Psalm 19:7. This is proving that God's way, He made a way for the world to operate perfectly and in paradise. The law of the Lord is perfect. There it is. The law, if we all followed the law of the Lord, we'd all be doing great. We'd all be perfect. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise from the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. Right? If we all operated in God's way, we'd be in paradise. Right? If we all operated without sin, all of us would have the heroic, majestic love and perfection of Christ, right, here on earth. But we don't. God gave us the opportunity to do our own thing, so we diverge from this law. He also gave us the ability to make choices. Whenever we choose to diverge from this perfect way, God's law, we sin. That's what sin is. It's us diverging from the way that we were built to operate, right? We're diverging from the way that God made the world to work, right? God has these perfect universal laws, this way the world should work. And when we choose not to do what God wants us to, that's what sin is, right? Here's 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. All who indulge, this is from the Message. All who indulge in a sinful life are dangerously lawless, for sin is a major disruption of God's order. Someone say it's good. I love a good proof, right? Isn't that great to have biblical evidence like that? That's what we're doing. We're diverging, we're disrupting the way that God made the world to work when we choose to sin, right? And this is that same verse in NIV. Everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness, right? Here's 1 John 5, verse 17. All wrongdoing is sin. That's it. All wrongdoing is sin. When we sin, the machine doesn't operate the way it should. So imagine a car, right? You put together this car. I'm not a gearhead. I'm not an auto man, right? I don't know. But I imagine that there's some complexities in this car with the different parts. Of course there is, right? You've seen the inside of a hood, hopefully. Imagine if someone made a car and all of these parts had this specific function for the way that it should work, right? But imagine if somehow the creator of this car told all of the pieces, hey, everything will go great if you do what you're supposed to do, but that's your choice to make. What's going to happen to that car if one of the pieces decides to not do what it was made for? That car's not going to work, right? That car's not going to work. And when one piece diverges from the way it was supposed to make, the whole thing goes to crap, right? And the other, and it might even be a slow downfall. One piece not working is going to start to affect another piece not working, even if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? This is a great analogy for where we are in the world with sin, right? We were built to operate a certain way, But we can choose to not do that. Right? And whenever that happens, whenever we choose to diverge from that law, we sin. Right? That's what sin is. Here's more simply put. That's MSP. More simply put. Sin is bad stuff. Right? That all sounded a little complex, and I wanted to get into what it is exactly based on the Bible. But if you look at the Bible, if you look at the conviction in your own life, sin is bad stuff, right? It's whatever you do that's not good, right? It's sin is stuff God doesn't like or approve of. That's as simple as we can get. It's just the bad stuff. If we weren't doing this series, I really don't like to use the word sin because I think it's too Christianese. It's too churchy when we could just say, hey, sin is bad choices, right? Stop making bad choices. Stop hurting other people. Stop making God sad, right? But that is what sin is. Okay, so that's where we are with that. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. Disclaimer, relative morality, and utilitarianism. I went to Western Michigan University. And I got a philosophy minor, and these two things up here, relative morality and utilitarianism, they're in a school of thought called ethics. If you've ever wanted to dive into ethics, we're going to be doing a little bit of that today and over this series. If you think, Josh, ethics don't belong in church, then you are mistaken, my friend, because we should be the king of ethics, right? Ethics is the Christian's bridge to a secular world. That we should know what ethics are, and when people talk about ethical choices or moral choices, we should be able to jump in there, right? So I want to talk about them today. I've got a couple disclaimers, and I want to talk about two things that are in my school of thought, which are relative morality and utilitarianism. We'll be talking about those throughout the whole series, but I want to break them down to start off with today. Here's the disclaimer. Other churches might say something different, but I'm right. End of speech. Okay. I always like to point out when my teaching is unconventional, right? Because either you're a church person, that's usually the majority of the case, and you think, that's not what I was taught, right? That disagrees with the view that I have been thinking for a long time. Great if that's the case, because one of two things are going to happen if you approach this unconventional teaching honestly. Either you'll give it a shot, see that it's wrong, and reaffirm your own view, or you'll give it a shot, see that it's right, and then grow. Both options, when we run into teaching that we disagree with or that's unconventional, if we're honest with ourselves and we give it a shot, either way, we'll grow. So I want to point that out. And another reason is because churches don't do that enough. A lot of pastors go, it's my way or the highway. I've got the right teaching. Anybody who differs with me, they're wrong. That's ludicrous. That'd be ludicrous of me to assume for myself. Of course, hey, spoiler alert, I'm wrong sometimes. I might be very wrong about things that I'm very right about, right? This series looks far different than it would have if I had preached it 4 years ago, right? Or even 2 years ago. We grow, we learn. So I want to give that disclaimer that if you really don't think this is right, there are other pastors that would say something different. Part of the problem is that there's not enough pastors that say anything about this at all. This topic about what makes something sinful isn't really preached on that much. And why? Why? I don't get it. Is it because people are too... It's probably because they're too scared to dive into it, and I'm the awesomest guy who can do it. I don't know what that voice was. But it's not talked about enough. Part of the problem is that people don't talk about this enough. If you go to another church and they say something different, Or if you go to a church and they say that they would disagree with my view, I really think it's just because they haven't dived into it. I think that my teaching here, and that's going to happen in this series, really isn't all that out of left field, right? It's really far more conventional than people think. It's just that people don't go down this rabbit hole of thought enough to know that this is pretty conventional, right? You might see words on here like utilitarianism and go, Josh, that is some liberal bogusness, dude. Stick to the Baptist doctrine, right? But I think this is pretty Baptist. If we actually went there and thought about it, not even Baptist, it's just not that theologically progressive. It's just not. But it's the problem of it seems uncertain, or it seems unfamiliar. So we think, oh, this must be way out there. It's not. And we'll get there throughout the whole thing. Here's one of the main themes of the series. It's one of them. Whether you think that my teaching is right or wrong, and this is really the point of the disclaimer, decide for yourself. We've all got to grow to where we can challenge, right? To where we can listen, to where we can decipher independently. So this is, if you walk away from today or this series going, I don't know what I think about that, which you might not at all. Maybe you'll go, oh, I loved it, which great. But if you walk away from the series going, I don't know what I think about that, you're in a great spot, right? God gave you a big old bowl of oatmeal for you to dig into and grow from, right? That is one of the best things that a church can offer you is a doggy bag message, right? Something for you to digest and consume and to nurture and grow you on your own, right? Churches should operate as a bunch of individuals who are independently faithful and independently growing in their faith, coming together to strengthen each other, right? And we only do that if our faith is independent. So decide for yourself whether I'm right or not. I always kind of don't like putting disclaimers because it makes people think like, oh, what kind of crazy stuff is he going to say? It's nothing that crazy, right? Don't worry about it. Okay. Is there anything else I wanted to say about that? No. Here's a piece of the unconventional teaching that I'm going to give today that's a good example is relative morality. Now let me first define what that means. Relative morality means that an action is good or bad depending on the situation, right? This is a point of much controversy in Christianity, this specific part, right? I'm a huge proponent of this school of thought. I think that that's what Jesus teaches. I think that that's what the Bible teaches overall. And I think that it applies to every situation. Christians buy into relative morality at least a little bit. You can't deny it altogether if you don't. Here's an example of what it is and something, and I'm using this example because I think everybody agrees with me on it. Wearing jorts. Does everybody know what jorts are?
Jogging shorts.
No, they're jean shorts. I'm never wearing my jorts jogging. I don't jog anyway, so maybe they are and I just don't know. I don't know. I should jog. Anyway, I wear jorts because I'm a millennial, and if you don't know what they are, the style now is like mid-thigh, tight jean shorts, and they're cutoffs, right? And maybe you roll up the cuffs at the bottom. But they're very hip, and I look great in them. So, but 2 years ago, I was living in Georgia, and there was this big Southern Baptist church right downtown. And I had a pair of jorts while I was down there. And I was like, and you know, it's Georgia in the summer, so it was 95 degrees, and it was only 3 blocks from where I was living. So I was like, oh, I'll throw on my jorts and go down to this church and enjoy a Southern Baptist, you know, maybe enjoy some of my roots. And but then as I was leaving my apartment there, I thought to myself, can I wear jorts to that church? I don't know if I'm supposed to. So I changed. And I put on jeans and a collared shirt. I even tucked my collared shirt in, wore a belt, whole shebang, had dress shoes on. So that's pretty fancy for me, as you guys know. So then I went to this Southern Baptist church, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was so underdressed at this church. And everybody looked at me like I was, the backslider, the back seat, the back pew Christian, I forget what they call that, what the term for that is. But, the guy who just came off of a 6-month bender and finally decided to come to church. That's what they looked at me like. And probably for good reason. I was breaking their customs. Right? I was being disrespectful. I wasn't. I kind of had a beef with them. It's like, come on, guys, I'm in jeans, and you're totally missing the point of this Christianity thing. But that's besides the point, right? If I had worn jorts out of protest to them, I would have been the one in the wrong, because I'd be disrespecting them. That'd be unbiblical of me to go in not caring at all about what they think, so I should wear khakis to a Southern Baptist church. It'd be sinful of me to wear the jorts to their church knowing what I did, right? That's relative morality. Because if you look at that line of thought, I would say I can't wear jorts to this church because out of respect for them. But there are some Christians who would argue, someone who totally denies relative morality would say, well, if you can't wear jorts to church, you can't wear them anywhere, right? And we'd say, no, that's ridiculous, right? I don't have to be puritanical. I don't have to go back to being like the people on the Mayflower who wore all black hats, showed no neck. That's obviously not what Christianity is about. So the morality depends on where I am and what the situation is, and we can all agree with that, right? There was a long time where 4-letter words, and this included the word poop. Sorry, I've got to say it from the pulpit. But those were frowned upon in my house, especially if my grandma was around, except for when they were on the Scrabble board. You could play those words on the Scrabble board because you needed the points, right? That's relative morality, right? We shouldn't even acknowledge those words on the Scrabble board if those words are bad in themselves. If the actions are inherently bad, then we should never do them, right? But we say, no, it depends on the time and place, and it depends on, who we're with and what's going on. That's relative morality. And I think that the more that you dig into that idea, the more that you see that that is true 100% of the time. It depends on who you're with, and this is an argument I'll be making later in this series. There are no actions inherently sinful, but it's the reaction to the actions. Now you might be thinking, Josh, that's way too out there. But we'll get to it. You might be with me by the end there. So that's relative morality, and we'll be talking about that a lot throughout the series. The second one, and the reason I'm talking about these is because we'll be mentioning them throughout the whole series as we go. And I want to get them out of the way now. So relative morality, one more time, is morality that's relative to something else, right? It's relative to the situation, to the culture, to whatever. The second one is utilitarianism. This is an ethics school of thought. If you're a utilitarianist, then you believe that right and wrong is based upon this idea of utility. And what utility is, or utils, is the singular unit, is a unit of measurement for happiness, right? Utility. If I installed my mom's dishwasher, let's use that for an example, then I'm increasing the world's utility because there's more happiness, peace, production, whatever. It's good stuff. A similar word in Christianity would be life. Are you producing life? Are you promoting life, right? Goodness. So that's utility, is just a unit of measurement for good things. Happiness, peace, love, this good feeling. How much utility does it offer? And this isn't a PhD level description of what utilitarian is, but it's the easiest way to put it. Simply put, actions are good in utilitarianism if the good outweighs the bad, right? Have you guys ever heard of trolley problems, where it's a educational tool to try and talk about morality? A train's going down a track. There are 10 people lined up on that track. You could flip a switch, and there's 5 people tied down on a divergence from that track. Ought you flip the switch? Should you change the way the track goes and kill 5 people, or should you just let the 10 people die, right? And utilitarianism answers that question by saying there'd be less utility if 10 people died, so you should switch the track, right? You should make it kill 5 people, because 5 deaths are worse than 10 deaths, right? It's a simple, almost mathematical equation of, hey, here's how much good is produced, here's how much bad is produced from an action. So the one with the most good, that's the action you should take. The bomb dropping, like Hiroshima, right? This is a question that comes up in ethics questions all the time. Should we have done that, right? We killed millions of people by doing that. But the utilitarian argument for that is, well, a lot more people would have died if we hadn't dropped that bomb. So utilitarianism would say it was good to do that. Now you might be thinking, Josh, what does this have to do with Christianity? Well, or you might be thinking, okay, I can see where it's going already, I don't know. But again, this is something that all Christians believe to some extent, right? That actions are based on whether stuff is, if the good outweighs the bad. Here's an example, it's Proverbs 13:24. This is spare the rod, spoil the child, right? That's a great example to talk about utilitarianism with. Let me see, I've got the verse on here somewhere because it lays it down great. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves his son is diligent to discipline him. Interesting. If you spank a kid, there's some bad stuff produced, right? It hurts to be disciplined, right? It's painful for the child. So you're producing bad stuff, right? And if we were this will come up by the end of this message very, very clearly associated to our topic, right? But if you spank your kid, that's going to hurt him. But what hurts more than being spanked is growing up a spoiled brat, right? There's far more pain that's produced from undiscipline than there is from that one act of discipline. I always talk about spraying my cat, right? It hurts me to spray my cat when she's doing something bad. But there'd be a lot more pain if she knocked over a potted plant. You know what I mean? There would be hell to pay. And Josh, nor cat, nor wife wants to deal with that interaction, right? So the good outweighs the bad. With discipline, we should discipline. So we all agree with that at least a little bit. And it's undeniable in the Bible, right? Here's a second example that I love, 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 love to talk about when we talk about what makes something sinful. And I'm sure it'll come up again. Rahab. Let's do a show of hands. Who thinks that lying is sinful? Let's put a hand up. I'm going to say yes, lying is sinful. I didn't look out there. I don't know. But I just did now. But Rahab, she was the woman in Jericho who hid the 2 spies, right? And what did she do when she hid those 2 spies? She lied. She flat out lied. And then the spies lived and God's mission got carried out because she lied. But then did God discipline her afterwards for the lie, even though it worked out? No, she got blessed because she lied, right? Her family was the only one that was spared in Jericho because she lied. That's utilitarianism, right? Lying in itself's not bad. It's what's the outcome from this. How many people are hurt versus how many people are healed, right? Very fun. Very interesting. Very interesting. Next slide. If we got through that whole thing and you thought, What does this have to do with anything? It'll make sense as the series goes along, right? So just remember those two things because they'll come up again. Yeah. What makes something sinful? Here we go. We're digging into it. And this is just going to be a shorter version of this thesis because we're going to be, again, talking about it over 7 weeks, right? And the last probably 3 weeks of this series is going to be us looking at some specific examples of sin and then applying this train of thought to them, seeing how it checks out. So we'll talk about like swearing, smoking cigarettes, drinking, and then seeing, well, how does this theory of what makes something sinful check out with those things. Okay, here we go. So let's just get into it. What makes something sinful? I've got it as simply put for the first sentence and then a more specific version of that afterwards. Something is sinful if it hurts someone else. If it hurts someone else, it's bad, right? I might be thinking, whoa, Josh, what about spanking your kid? What about the child? Aha, yes, that's where the utilitarianism comes in, right? Here it is put more specifically. If it produces more pain for others than it does life for others, it's sinful, right? If we create pain, and we create more pain than we do life from an action, it's selfish, it's ungodly, it's sinful, right? I grew my view. I used to say that, and we'll dive into this in just a second too. I used to say that if it hurts someone else, yourself, or God, it's sinful. Those were my 3 things. If it hurts yourself, someone else, or God. But I changed it to this thing for other people because that's what it all boils down to if you think about it, right? Hurting yourself, one of the reasons that it's bad is you can't hurt yourself without hurting other people. If you hurt yourself, you're hurting other people. There's no way around it. If you are self-destructive, other things are affected, right? So it comes down to you hurting someone else. If you slandered God, if you sinned against God, if you hurt God, right? What does that do? It hurts other people. If you spread lies and misinformation about God on purpose, other people are going to miss out on maybe a great relationship with God because you spread that slander. You sinned against God. Their lives are hurt. So everything comes down to hurting other people, right? If it's going to hurt someone else in the long run and produce more pain than it does life, it's sin. God's natural law, Josh, why do you think that? Why is that the view? God's natural law is summed up in loving others. God's natural law is summed up, let's say that together, in loving others, right? If we are being unloving to others, we are breaking His law. If we are being unloving to others, if we're causing others pain, right, then we're diverging from God's natural universal way of life, right? That is not what we should do. That is what we ought not to do, right? Here's some biblical evidence, and we talk about this verse all the time, partially because it sums up the whole Bible, right? So, of course, naturally, we're going to bring it up all the time. Matthew 22, an expert in the law asked Jesus this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? That's God's law. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Someone say it's good. Good. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. These 2 commandments have 3 characters in them. God, your neighbor, and yourself. God, your neighbor, and yourself. And if you're unloving to any of those, you're breaking the law, right? Are you sure, Josh? Oh no, here's verse 40. All the law, and the prophets, the whole Old Testament, everything hang on these 2 commandments. Well, Josh, I don't know if that's quite enough biblical evidence for me to support your theory that sin is just when you hurt someone else. Let's go to it. Here's Matthew 7:12. Jesus speaking again. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So now, being loving to others, right? The law doesn't just hang on them, it's summed up in them. That's the entirety of God's law, is loving others. So by negation, if you are being unloving to others, you're breaking the law, right? I don't know, Josh. That's kind of a stretch. It's a little bit of a logical fallacy. Let's keep reading. This is Romans 13 in the Message. Do not run up debts except for the huge debt of love you owe each other. Someone say it's good. When you love others, here's the big one. When you love others, you complete what the law has been after all along. The law code. Don't sleep with another person's spouse. Don't take someone's life. Don't take what isn't yours. All of these things, that we say are sinful, right? Don't always be wanting what you don't have. And any other don't you can think of finally adds up to this. Love other people as well as you do yourself. Someone say it's good, please. You can't go wrong when you love others. You can't go wrong when you love others. When you add up everything in the law code, the sum total is love. Here's the last two verses of that in the NIV. And whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. It's all over, right? This is the whole thing, man, is that we've got to love. And when we don't love, we sin, right? If our whole purpose, destiny, and code of action is summed up in one thing, to love others, right? Then we break that when we break that one thing, right? We are breaking the law when we don't love others. Next slide. If we're unloving, we're sinning. If you're not loving your neighbor as yourself, you are going against something in God's natural universal laws, right? If you are causing more pain for someone than life, you're sinning. If you sin against yourself, you'll hurt others. If you sin against God, you'll hurt others. But here's the last thing that I want to leave us with, going back to utilitarianism and relative morality. If we learn anything from the Bible / Jesus, from his example, it's that love is complex. What did we start off saying today? Life is complex. So if life is complex, then love is complex. And how we love people is going to be hard to figure out. If you did ask yourself for every action of your whole day today, how can I love others? I bet we wouldn't be able to answer that for a lot of those questions. We've got to think hard. We've got to dig into what is love, what makes something sinful, right? We've got to dig into this idea of how do I actually love others? How do I do good? How do I promote life, right? When we do that, we'll understand sin. And when we understand sin, we'll understand love, right? Because the two are tied together. Love is complex. It's rich, beautiful, perfect, but complex. How do we know if we're loving others the right way? Rahab, the prostitute, by the way, who hides the spies, right? She could have said, well, loving is the absence of sin. So if I'm trying to love everyone, I can't lie. So spies, you're out of luck. I can't lie for you. But she didn't. She lied for him. And that wasn't sin. So that must have been loving. So how do we reconcile all of those ideals, right? How do we make sense out of all of these different components? Can you lie? Can you not lie? When is it okay? When is it not? It's tough. That's what we're going to be getting into over the next couple of weeks. When we need to learn how to love well in order to avoid sin. And we need to avoid sin to love well. It's all tied together, right? So that's what we're going to be digging into over the next probably 6 weeks now. But it'll be under this framework, right? Promoting more life than we do pain. Think about one last thing. Think about any sin in your life, right? Something that you think, oh, I know that's definitely sinful. Why is it sinful? Why is it bad? What makes us so certain that it's bad? Probably because, hey, this person, someone got hurt, right? The stuff that we really know is sinful, we can point out, this person was treated, they got the short end of a stick here. And the reason that we normally do it is because we think that it will make our lives better. So we're trying to promote our own growth of life at the expense of someone else. That's usually what it looks like. And we're going to dive into that idea next week.